Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Griffin. I'm a futurist and strategic advisor. I'm the CEO of the 311 Institute and the World Futures Forum, and just to sort of give you a little bit more of an introduction, I advise a whole variety of different organizations all around the world. So when it comes to investor communities, I advise around 400 different investors across the PE, the VC, the global asset management space. Typically, those organizations have about $7 trillion at any point invested in a whole variety of different organizations, both sort of, the traditional multinationals and blue chips and fortunes, but also sort of startups. I also work with a variety of different governments. So I work with the G7 and the G20 governments. So that's typically where we're working 20 to 50 years out. And we are looking at the things such as future of education, skills, workforce, tax, regulations, and so on and so forth. And frankly, when you have a look at the vast majority of spaces today and sectors, everything is changing. And that both presents you with opportunity, it presents you with risk, but it also presents you with threats. Particularly as we start seeing the rise of new megatrends. So for example, this year we've had the pandemic, we've also had geopolitical trends basically taking their bite out of different organizations, and we'll go through some of those. And we live in turbulent times. We are hoping that sort of next year that we're going to be living in a little bit more straightforward times, and I'm sure that we're all looking forward to getting back to normal. New normal, the great reset, the great recovery, whatever all these different organizations and governments want to call it at the moment. So, as a CFO, let me ask you this question. What's your purpose? And what's your organization's purpose? If your immediate subconscious answer is, I don't know, or I'm not sure, you need to get on top of this. And that's an obvious one, but you need to get on top of that, because organizations with purpose are more likely to do well, but they're also more likely to retain and attract the talent that they need. Now, as a CFO, you have two choices. Do you want to just support the business in a traditional way, or do you want to help co-create the future? Now, when we actually go and have conversations with CFOs, so I typically work with prime ministers, presidents, I work with ministers as well across the G20, but I also work with boards, both in an advisory capacity, a committee capacity, and I'm having all kinds of different conversations across the C-suite. Only 5% of CFOs proactively go out and have a look and get a grasp of new technologies. Bearing in mind that today we live in turbulent times where these new technologies can fuel the rise of disruptive unicorns, decacorns, and everything else that can take your incumbent and established organization out within a couple of years. And we have some examples of that coming up. So if you want to co-create the future, there's actually a lot of opportunity. In addition to that, what you measure is what you get. So this is from Mike. Basically, he's the CFO of Costain. So when he started coming into the organization, he actually started having a look at all the different things that they were actually measuring, and found that a lot of the things that were being measured were relatively tactical. They didn't really help the future prosperity of the organization. So he changed everything that they were actually measuring, and Costain is now back on a growth path. So again, kind of sort of basic messaging, but I just sort of wanted to get these out there just to clarify these points. Now, I often suffer, as a futurist, from something that I call the time traveler's dilemma. Now, imagine that I went back to the 1980s and I had perfect knowledge of the year 2020, 2021. And I went back and I had conversations with executives, leaders, presidents, prime ministers of the time, whatever it happens to be. And I said, in the future, I think that there will be a huge demand for something. So let's say, for example, cybersecurity experts. At that point, those leaders would have said, okay, what's a cybersecurity expert? And I'd say, well, a cybersecurity expert is a person who protects assets basically across the internet and from nefarious actors who want to do harm. At that point, basically those leaders would then say, okay, another question. This is 40 years ago, bear in mind. Just another little bit of a question. What's the internet? I then say, well, the internet is this interconnected web of computers and things that connects over 3.5 billion people on our planet together. and it has changed every single corner of global culture, industry, and society. I'd be kicked out the door. And the same conversation could have been had 10 years ago with the CEOs, CFOs, and CXOs, basically, of the automotive industry. Imagine going into Mercedes and saying, in about 5 to 7 years' time, I predict that you are going to completely flip your business model so that you no longer aim to sell cars to consumers. You will sell them as a service. You are going to spend tens to hundreds of billions of dollars electrifying your cars and making cars that drive themselves. I'd still be shown the door. And I can do this with every single industry. And I can do this basically whether we step back 50 years ago or 5 years ago. Now, this wasn't actually lost on the New York Business Council. You might have heard of these guys. They're made up of pretty much every single CEO in the Fortune 250 over in the USA. They're headed up by Jamie Dimon. And about 2 years ago, before the pandemic, 181 of them, including the likes of Jeff Bezos, signed up to end their focus on shareholder primacy. So shareholder primacy was originally brought about in the 1990s, and it's the rule that says you put shareholders first, something you'll all be familiar with. Now, this particular trend, on the one hand, was led by the fact that we live in increasingly turbulent and disruptive times. Organizations basically are typically driven more to focus on the near-term results at the expense of the long-term results. And increasingly, that just doesn't balance, let alone when we start talking about ESG, community values, social values, and all these kinds of things. But one of the characters who really started fueling this trend was Jeff Bezos. So in 1997, he wrote these words, and he's included these words in every single shareholder letter that he's submitted to shareholders as well as Wall Street ever since. We will make investment decisions in light of long-term market leadership considerations rather than short-term profitability considerations or short-term Wall Street reactions. Now, we all know what happened to Amazon. They've got a market cap basically of over $1.5 trillion. They are the tech darlings, and they are still growing like stink. And that's because Jeff Bezos fundamentally went to Wall Street in the early days and said, don't expect Amazon to make any profits for 7 years. If you expect me to make profits in 7 years' time, get out of my stock. And we all know how that went. And he's not the only one that is now doing this. This is being copied across the US to a degree, Europe to a degree, but it's actually being copied a lot in Asia and China. So I work across the world and I see this more in China, and we know what's going on there. Now, when we start talking about how you deal with the future, where the future can actually either be tomorrow, it can be the near term, the mid-term, it can be the long term, speed matters. So this comes straight out of Harvard University, but it's actually true. And I'm going to back it up with some information. So consider this. We live in an increasingly interconnected world and an increasingly digital world. If someone was going to be adopting a new product or service about 70 plus years ago, say for example like the telephone took 75 years for 50 million people to adopt it. So what that means is I create a product, and then over a 75-year period, 50 million people use my product. When we have a look at Pokemon Go, it took 19 days to reach 50 million. When we have a look at Call of Duty, it took 7 days to reach 100 million. So this is where we're now starting to talk about fundamentally changing industry and market dynamics within very, very short time spans that have an impact basically on how you invest, your strategy, your vision, your horizon planning views, etc., etc., etc. Now, that means that I create a product and I can get it out to market faster than ever before. I can have it adopted at an unfathomable scale. Now, when we start having a look at the financial services industry, this was actually brought into stark contrast by Facebook. So Facebook created their Libra cryptocurrency, which has now been rebranded as Diem. Now, Libra, had Facebook been able to launch it in the way that they wanted to, Facebook would have been able to launch it to 2.5 billion users. They could have theoretically had over 500 million people using Libra within the first couple of hours, let alone the first couple of days. And in the words of the European Central Bank, the US Fed, the Chinese People Bank, PBOC, as well as the UK Bank of England, Libra was so disruptive, which is why the regulators stomped on it. Libra was so disruptive, it could have changed the global financial services industry overnight, and it could have ended state control of money overnight. So when you think we live in disruptive times, we do to a degree, but we also are living in disruptive times where these disruptions are coming at you faster and faster and faster. So as a result, as a CFO, you need to learn how to deal with uncertainty and probability. These are your new bedfellows. They've always been there, but the dynamics of these are actually changing. The future's coming fast. It's also more complex. And I'm not really going to dive too much into this, but as a futurist, I track over 350 exponential emerging technologies, let alone thousands of trends across sectors, across different demographic groups, across different regions, etc., etc., etc. Every single technology on this starburst has an addressable market opportunity of over $500 billion and can either disrupt one industry or every industry. So I'll give you a couple of few examples. 3D printing is one dot, and the starburst goes from about 2021 to 2071. 3D printing is increasingly capable, and increasingly it is disrupting the $10 trillion manufacturing industry. Let alone everything else that it's disrupting. In addition to that, basically when we have a look at computing technologies and energy technologies and communications technologies, in the communication space we have the rollout of 5G, which is multiple times faster than 4G. 4G gave the global economy a boost, or actually gave the US economy a boost, they estimate, of over $1.7 trillion. 5G is expected to supercharge the global economy by an estimated $8 trillion, but estimates do vary. When we start having a look at energy systems, if you're investing in lithium-ion batteries now for electric vehicles, I can show you electric vehicles that are already going wireless, and I can already show you electric vehicles that have batteries built into the chassis of the car. Yeah, we go round and round and round. Artificial intelligence is impacting every single corner of society. Artificial narrow intelligence, then we have artificial general intelligence in 2035 and artificial superintelligence in about 2060. We have robotics coming through, both in terms of RPA, as well as soft robots, as well as hardware robots. Hardware robots are now getting so sophisticated they can outperform humans based on a whole variety of tasks, including, for example, picking goods in a warehouse. Now, again, if you're Amazon, you have 800,000 people employed in that particular one job alone. And we go round and round and round. But these technologies are transforming every single part of your business. You're adopting most of these technologies. You're being asked about these technologies. Your CIOs are coming to you basically with project plans, asking how you incorporate and can they get funding basically for these different technologies to allow you to create new products and services to do new things. Now, when we start having a look at risk, risk today is systemic. And when we have a look at STEEP, whether it's societal, technological, environmental, whether it's economic or political, risk is increasingly systemic. One thing happens over here, it's like a pack of dominoes falling over. Just look at the global pandemic, it's the ideal example. We have cyber as another example, and so on and so forth. So now I thought this would be a little bit of fun just to demonstrate systemic risk. I'm going to show you how you wipe $22 billion off someone's share price in 1 minute. So I'm going to play you two videos. They're short. The second video is actually recently, and then I'm going to explain. So in 2019, Bloomberg made an error when they reported Facebook's earnings. Bloomberg are a trusted data source. When they made the error, they said that Facebook made a loss rather than a profit. The shares in Facebook went down by $22 billion in 1 minute. The reason for that is because algorithmic traders managed to read Bloomberg's report, saw the word loss, dumped the stock. When Bloomberg pushed out a correction, stock went straight back up again. So what happens if I can weaponize your information sources? What happens if I can spread disinformation about your company or misinformation about your company? So if you're a little bit sensitive, turn your sound off. So I'm going to show you deep fakes, synthetic media, and then I'm going to give you a little example about how we can tank Samsung's stock.
We're entering an era in which our enemies can make it look like anyone is saying anything at any point in time, even if they would never say those things. So, for instance, they could have me say things like, Killmonger was right, or Ben Carson is in the sunken place, or, how about this, simply, President Trump is a total and complete dipshit. Now, you see, I would never say these things, at least not in a public address, but someone else would. Someone like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time. Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet. That's a time when we need to rely on trusted news sources. It may sound basic, but how we move forward in the age of information is going to be the difference between whether we survive or whether we become some kind of fucked up dystopia. Thank you, and stay woke, bitches.
President Obama saying things that he probably shouldn't. So, I said we'd tank Samsung's stock price. I can do it to you as well. I'll do it to Coca-Cola in a moment. So, let's take 20% off Samsung's stock price, albeit temporarily. So I can produce 3 kinds of deep fakes, basically, and I can get the vast majority of people to believe them. Now, if I can insert some of these deep fakes basically into a trusted news source, bearing in mind that's actually not that difficult, I can do 3 things. So, for example, I can produce 3 pieces of media, see which one you might believe. So, the first one, President Joe Biden has decided that he is going to assassinate the leader of North Korea. Okay, that's probably unlikely as a piece of news. The other piece of news I can create is President Joe Biden has decided to marry Kim Jong-un, the leader of North Korea. That's probably also unlikely. Bearing in mind that the first one would have actually caused a lot of issues, basically, particularly in the South Korean peninsula. What about this middle one? It's a little bit more believable. President Joe Biden today announced that he's moving the US 7th Pacific Fleet basically off the coast of the Korean peninsula. What do you think happens to Samsung stock? Now, if I'm an organized crime group, bearing in mind they are actually the most resilient industry on the planet for a whole variety of different reasons, Samsung stock just got tanked. Now, I could also create something like this following video, and I'll tell you why this is significant. You might have seen this. Is this real or fake, by the way? It's fairly basic.
Coca-Cola.
I could have created a fake Ronaldo, and that clip that you saw there, within 20 seconds, $4 billion was wiped off Coca-Cola's share price. Now imagine and I didn't have to get anywhere near Bloomberg networks or anything like that. So when we start talking about things like financial reporting, are your financial reporting systems and processes and networks and channels bulletproof? Because they will need to be, because I have a whole variety of different ways, I have a whole different number of tricks up my sleeve to tank your share price. Whether it's short term or actually longer term, I could mount a disinformation campaign against you and you wouldn't like that and you couldn't fight me. So another example basically of financial fraud. I can take 1 minute of your voice, an artificial intelligence from a variety of different companies, and I can clone your CEO's voice. So this actually happened. Euler Hermes actually paid out on this. This is essentially a type of cybercrime. So what happened here was someone cloned the CEO's voice of a global energy firm. The CEO was based over in Germany. The CEO the fake CEO phoned up the CEO of the UK energy subsidiary, which is actually a FTSE listed energy company, and asked them to transfer $257,000 to an Eastern European bank account. Now, because the phone call sounded real, because the criminals had actually used AI voice cloning technology, the transfer went ahead. You can have a look at this in the Wall Street Journal. So everything I say, you can go and have a look online, you can dig into it and explore it. Now, again, tighten your financial processes. Are you prepared for this kind of attack? This is a risk, and it's happened to Google and Facebook as well. Basically, they've had a variety of different procurement scams, basically, that have conned them out of millions of dollars, but that's another story. When we look at risks as well, depending on the industry that you're in, if you have a single sensor that is monitoring something in a factory, an industrial plant, or whatever it happens to be, I can do an Internet of Things attack. I can change the measurements and the readings that you get from that particular type of sensor. And as we saw in Saudi Arabia, I can blow your industrial plant up. So cyber is a whole conversation in itself, but are you ready for that kind of risk to your operations? Everything is vulnerable. Go and have a conversation with your CISO. And run some doomsday games. That's a conversation for later. Geopolitics, we've seen this, as your company sort of wants to expand, make different investments in different countries for different reasons, you might end up getting blacklisted. Increasingly we seem to be living in a protectionist and nationalistic world as opposed to a globalized world, but we kind of keep flitting between the two. Now, when we start talking about how we return to growth, chaos and crisis obviously create opportunity. However, as you digitize your business, as other industries digitize, consider this. The more you digitize individual industries, the fewer boundaries there are between them all. So that means that if you are in one industry, it is easier for you to move into adjacent industries or alternative industries than ever before. Now, if I go and have a conversation with a financial services organization, a retailer, an automotive company, and say, what industries are you guys in? They will come back and say, we are in the loaning money out business. We are in the selling stuff business. We are in the making cars business. If I go and have that same conversation basically with the people who seem to haunt most people, fatbags, so Facebook, Alibaba, Tencent, Apple, Google, you can sort of switch the acronyms around as you like. They go, we're in all of them. We go back to that Amazon example. Amazon basically is in everything from finance to healthcare to retail to entertainment, very similar basically with Google, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this creates opportunity, but it also means that as we start fast forwarding through time, your new competition are probably going to be people that you have no experience going up against. And every industry is being disrupted. So in the agri-tech industry, we are now able to grow plants in vertical farms. We can use 99% less water, 100% less pesticides and herbicides and chemicals. We can grow 8 crops a year. We can grow them organically, and we can increase our yields overall by tenfold. In addition to that, I can take the stem cell or a feather from a chicken, put it into a bioreactor. This is a clean meat technology. We've seen the cost of this plummet. We've seen South Korea approve this. The US approved this. I can take a cell from a chicken. I can grow it in a bioreactor. I can create chicken nuggets. And in that case, I now no longer have to kill chickens. In fact, I don't have to kill any animals whatsoever. So that's disrupting the agricultural business. When we start having a look at the energy business, we're moving to renewables. Over 1 trillion watts of renewables are now installed. We are decentralizing energy generation. In addition to that, we see autonomous energy grids coming through, particularly in Europe. But also consider this, the cost of energy generation is falling to zero. It's now at 0.2 cents per kilowatt hour over in the UAE. So go and have a look at the cost of energy generation for any type of renewable energy graph. It's doing this. If you are an organization that sucks up energy like it's going out of fashion, consider renewables and considering cutting your energy costs pretty much to zero. Start putting artificial intelligence in there and you can save 40% off your energy bills like Google recently did as well. In the financial services industry, we see the rise of fintechs, we see decentralized finance, we obviously see crypto, we see central bank digital currencies that are starting to be trialed, particularly in Asia, parts of Europe. The UK and America are sort of still thinking about things like the digital dollar, the digital pound. Europe is still considering kind of the digital euro. But nevertheless, CBDCs fundamentally change basically the financial economy and a whole variety of other things, including regulations. When we have a look at healthcare, this has been supercharged by the pandemic. We're seeing gene editing coming through that allows us to genetically engineer people in vivo so they no longer have an inherited genetic condition. This is where we start looking at life extension. So if your companies have pension plans and you work with organizations like BlackRock, where we think, well, you know, most people die at the age of 84 because that's the average. We are now literally in the healthcare space on the cusp of getting to a point in time where people will be living between 120 to 150 years. Biotech and healthcare is a whole area by itself. You know, we can 3D print human hearts. I have a video on that. In 10 years' time, we'll be implanting those within people, and there's no risk of rejection. And then when we have a look at the transportation industry, everything is about mobility as a service. Everything's being electrified. Everything's being automated. We're taking the operators out of the cabins of everything from aircraft to vans to semi-trucks to cars. Every industry is fundamentally being rewritten from the inside out by technology and by human ingenuity. These are an opportunity for your business if you want to co-create the future, but they are also a systemic threat to your business if you aren't aware of them. So bearing in mind 5% of CFOs are aware of technologies or go out and have a look at technologies. This is all tech driven. So go out and explore. Now, when we start having a look at innovating products on demand, if you look at research and development at the moment, we spend about $1.7 trillion a year globally on research and development. $782 billion basically is spent by the world's top 1,000 companies, and you can guess where they're spending it. It's typically on energy, transportation, technology, healthcare, those kinds of areas. But when we start having a look at the rise of another type of technology, creative machines, we have companies, your competitors all around the world, that are now using artificial intelligence to produce products at unimaginable speed. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a clip. At the moment, these AIs are good at iterating new products, but they are increasingly moving to primary and disruptive innovation, but they're a combination of different technologies. So what I'm going to show you now is actually, looks weird, but think about the principle. So think about your own research and development team. Think about what happens when your R&D teams come to you and say, we want more money. You could actually give them less money and you could actually quintuple your output. So what we have here basically is we have a product that is packed with sensors. It's been tasked with getting from one side of the room to the other as fast as possible. That task has been given to an artificial intelligence. The product feeds information back to the artificial intelligence, which runs thousands of simulations per minute to come up with product version number 2. So these types of innovation accelerate your rate of innovation anywhere between 10,000 to billion-fold, and that's billion with a B. If you want to challenge me on that point, have a conversation. I will show you the tech. I will put you in touch with the company. OpenAI is one. So that design from that artificial intelligence is sent to a 3D printer. The 3D printer is now able to make that product on demand. That eliminates your entire supply chain, or a significant amount of your supply chain. So remember, I said 3D printing is disrupting manufacturing. If we swap the 3D printer for a 4D printer, the robot, in this case, prints itself and walks out of the printer. So now think that 5G is coming along. You have lots of Internet of Things and lots of sensors in lots of places around your organization. whether it's sensors in a car that feeds information back to an artificial intelligence that designs your car faster. And when you start feeding this back to a digital twin factory like BMW are, all of a sudden that artificial intelligence can design a product, it can have a conversation with a digital twin factory that is actually a factory in virtual simulation, and the factory can set itself up. So you're optimizing manufacturing. This is Industry 4 on steroids. Now, as for companies that are doing this, these are going to be some of your competitors. Airbus are using these technologies to design the next A330neo. InSilico used artificial intelligence to design 31,000 new drug treatments in 21 days. If they're a competitor of yours, you're looking at that number and thinking, jeepers. NASA designed new lunar rovers that were 30% lighter, so from a sustainability perspective, these things are great at cutting out not only wastage, but they're also great at cutting out the amount of raw materials you need to make products. And Under Armour used these to create a new type of sneaker. The AI created the sneaker in 1 day. Sneaker could be 3D printed the next day, 2 days. So in their particular case, they managed to cut their concept to shelf time down by 99%. They'd normally take about 18 months basically to go from concept to shelf. So think what happens when your competitors start using more and more of these creative artificial intelligences. At that point, you're starting to man and woman a sinking ship. You are going to start getting into trouble. You need to get ahead of the curve. In addition to that, AI is creating content. It's creating everything from music to games to books, and that's another whole other conversation. Now, when we have a look at ESG and the development of sustainable value, ESG needs to be central to your strategy. If you improve resilience, you can actually reduce the harm not only to your own organization, your own brand image, but also to the planet in general. So I'm going to give you some stats, and this is why. So the investors I work with, ESG is increasingly crucial, as it is with most of the governments. You know, Europe, for example, when we look at the Great Recovery, they are focusing on ESG style investing. So as Goldman Sachs said, ignore sustainability and be worthless. That's fairly harsh. Now, the cost of environmental inaction. So far, the hidden costs that we see and that we are burdened with from the energy and transportation industries is an estimated $25 trillion a year. Now, that is actually lowballed. So we had lots of ranges, obviously. $3 trillion, the cost of the world's top 7,000 extreme events killed 1.23 million people. They affected 4.2 billion people, which is more than 1 in 2 on the planet. And these extreme weather events and generally extreme events are getting more and more. The top 10 disasters in 2019 alone basically cost $140 billion. These disasters might have flooded one of your manufacturing partners, which then delayed all of your products being shipped or produced, for example. The number of multi-billion-dollar disasters since 1990 to kind of 2020, excluding the pandemic, has risen from 7 on average to around 44 last year. I mean, these are staggering numbers. You know, you can see everything is going up. So when someone says, why is ESG important? We have numbers. In addition to that, when we have a look at the amount of children basically in the world who are actually being subjected to, shall we say, poor working conditions or who are having to work, 152 million children are working. So when we start looking at things like supply chain transparency, supply chain reporting, ESG reporting, you know, these have to be taken into account. Apple and Apple's share price have been hurt by these things. When we have a look at organized crime is one of the few industries that's growing double digits. Whole conversation again. It's now worth $6 trillion, which is about 6 to 7% of global GDP. Now, when we start having a look at the impact that coronavirus has actually had on people, you know, so the common garden worker. In 2020, the world's billionaires gained over $3.9 trillion worth of assets. They are now worth about $11 to $12 trillion. That's more than most countries' GDPs. $3.7 trillion was the amount that the world's workers lost in wages. $40 trillion is the current cost of the global pandemic. The cost of creating the next pandemic, thanks to Canadian researchers who took DNA, a genetic sequence, and $100,000 is $100,000. You want to create the next pandemic? We can de-extinct and have de-extincted the horsepox virus for $100,000. It was taken to the World Health Organization about 2 years ago. Most of the world's leaders looked at it and just went, meh. So are you prepared? When we start talking about post-COVID, you need to be a resilient organization. There's lots of dangers. Now, when we're talking about ESG reporting, you can do it in a kind of blank slate kind of way, but tell a story. You know, wrap your ESG stories and reporting around, for example, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Create a story. If you create a story, it helps your brand. It also helps your share price. It helps hiring and talent retention and all these other sort of things. It also helps from an investment perspective. Future workforce. So we're almost there now. When we have a look at reimagining work, it's no wonder that 61% of CFOs want to reimagine work post-COVID or are thinking about reimagining how their employees work, where their employees work after COVID. Now, I want to show you these because I want to show you what's possible. And obviously you can formulate your own ideas on, you know, work from home, work from anywhere and everything else. The advent of 5G networks during the pandemic meant that, for example, surgeons were able to remotely operate on patients at hospital from the comfort of their own homes using mixed reality and augmented reality. So we are increasingly reaching the point with communications technologies where workers can be but we can build buildings on different continents where, for example, the construction workers are in Germany, but they're building buildings and sites in South Korea, 4,500 kilometers away using 5G. But this is an example of using 5G to help surgeons remotely operate and do things from wherever they are on the planet. With patients, it could be hundreds of miles.
We had a young woman with an acute heart attack. The total transfer time to get her to our hospital was 3 hours. There's a feeling of helplessness as a physician that you know what the treatment is to limit their chance of death, but you can't get to them.
Our hypothesis is that if we implement remote robotics in its full capacity, we will change the lives for hundreds of thousands of patients in the US and millions around the world.
Using technologies like 5G networks and robotic systems to provide cardiac care at a distance and be able to do telestenting has the potential to change the landscape of medicine. 5G technology really opens up the possibility to do these over longer distances with minimal delays in signal and transmitting greater amounts of data.
Being able to reach a patient hundreds of miles away to deliver the care they need when they need it is one of the most disruptive things happening in the medical industry.
So, remote surgeon is hundreds of miles away from the actual patient. You can apply this to almost every single job category today. Now, when we start having a look at the use of augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality, basically in work from anywhere constructs, consider this. Over time, technology gets cheaper, it becomes more ubiquitous, and it miniaturizes. So for example, if you want virtual reality in about a year's time, you can use glasses, not these big fat headsets, basically that you get from companies like HCI, but you can use glasses from companies like Facebook and Panasonic. So put on a pair of things that look like sunglasses and you're in a virtual reality world. We have companies like Mojo who've created augmented reality contact lenses. So what would happen when the devices start miniaturizing? It's easier for your customers and for your employees just to put on a pair of glasses and suddenly they have a completely new work experience. And increasingly, those work experiences often mean that those people are up to 30% more productive. So look at these as productivity tools, let alone just the other advantages of, associated with, not having to travel, et cetera, et cetera. So this is an example of where
connection
HoloLens
is a spark that gives our lives meaning.
Physical experience. Why do people need to be
It drives us to seek out others who feel the same way.
Okay, why don't you input the data and we'll take a look together. Hey Mari, what you got for me?
To find those who share our views, yet offer different perspectives.
Look over here.
Challenge us with new ways of seeing.
That I think we should.
Deepen our understanding. And enrich our lives.
最后一笔的时候，往前。
Great things happen when we commit to something bigger than ourselves.
Take a closer look at it.
Place this here. Let's see how we go from there, okay?
This sense of collaboration and the feelings of connection it brings excites us.
Hey, just in time. I'm gonna move it slightly, okay?
It's yours, take it.
We have 2 planes right now on the same trajectory.
As we put people first, technology fades into the background and feels like anything but.
Aisha, what do you think?
I think if we had 330, maintaining 2800, we'll be clear for approach.
Excellent.
This changes the way we see the world, and in turn, changes the world we see.
These numbers are looking great, actually.
There's promise in the possibilities, and what we see and create next will stretch the imagination.
Good morning, Sarah.
Morning.
Slowly coming towards the thumb.
A world without boundaries.
Good job. A lot better than yesterday.
Yeah.
Excellent. Slowly bring the
A
arm
world
down.
where technology enhances, not limits, humanity. With people front, center, and in the spotlight. The future is here. And here can be anywhere. Introducing Microsoft Mesh.
So we can literally decentralize all kinds of different work. And is it actually that important that people aren't physically next to one another? But when you can actually just step into these types of experiences. But from a productivity perspective, from a hiring perspective, these technologies are increasingly revolutionary. And when we start looking at technology, we're now on the final stretch. Beware becoming an algorithmic company. I know that everyone typically talks about digitization and automation. Automation is a double-edged sword, both for you, your companies, and your employees, particularly as we start seeing the rise of fully autonomous companies coming out of Wall Street as well as Hong Kong. That's a different story for another time. Now, consider this. Increasingly, artificial intelligence is being used to hire your people, or to find your people, hire your people, manage your people, and in some cases like Uber and Amazon, fire your people. So be very, very careful how you build automation into your workforce strategy, let alone your overall company strategy. Pros and cons. You want to make sure that you are on the right side. And in addition to that, when we start having a look at the development of digital humans, when we start looking at diversity and inclusion and the importance of diversity, inclusion, and the importance of reporting D&I basically to your investors and to other interested parties, what impact does a digital human have? Bearing in mind they are coming, they are here, they're being used by companies like WPP and so on and so forth. What impact does a digital human have on your D&I and hiring practices? When we look at D&I itself, organizations that promote diversity and inclusion typically are 1.7 times more likely to be innovation leaders than their peers. And Sodexo, for example, has said that over 23%, they've seen over 23% gross profit increases because of their specific D&I hiring policies. But speaking of D&I, meet Damon.
Today, like Matthew says, disruption is everywhere, so why go to all those lengths to hire a human to do a job anyway? Why not just make your own digital human? And if you do, then what does that mean for diversity and equality within your company?
And with that, thank you, Damon. That's the end. So thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been insightful. What I've tried to do is I've tried to give you things to think about, things to explore, and I've tried to show you just how much we are pushing the boundaries today. So I wish you well, and I hope to see you all soon. Take care. Goodbye.
That was an amazing presentation, Matthew. Thank you so very much. We definitely love all your thoughts on future-proofing the finance department with things like data, AI, augmented reality, and artificial reality, and how to achieve a financially forward growth. And Matthew, we've got some feedback that some of the participants was not able to view your videos clearly. So perhaps after this, you could just share with us the video so that we can share with the delegates as well.
That's fine. I will do that.
Amazing, amazing. So ladies and gentlemen, in the interest of time, we do not have time for a Q&A, but do not worry if you have any questions for Matthew, please just share it with us. We will have your questions answered. Isn't that right, Matthew?
That's quite right. That's it. I'm only on the end of the wire. That's it. Location basically is no barrier now.
Would you like to end with some closing remarks for us before we go?
Yeah, absolutely. So the world around you is changing in new and extraordinary ways. We live in extraordinary times, basically, that is filled with both huge numbers of threats, but also huge and tremendous numbers of opportunities. So I encourage you all to explore. Get outside, get out of your office first when you're allowed in the office. Go and have conversations that you wouldn't normally have conversations with, people who you wouldn't normally talk to. Look at what's happening in adjacent industries. Come to events like these and really start thinking, if you were a startup or if you're an entrepreneur, if you could start from a blank slate, which I know you can't, that's it, we can have that conversation. Yeah, what would you do differently? Yeah, there is a tremendous amount of opportunity out there for organizations basically that help co-create the future. And I've just shown you probably quite a lot, actually. So there you go. Yeah, go and explore.
Well said, Matthew. Thank you so very much once again. And I really hope you do enjoy the rest of your day. Yeah. But do feel free to also join us for any of the sessions. You can pop in and pop out.
I will. I'll be watching everything. Right. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's move back from Matthew's virtual studio back to our virtual studio here in Corporate World Intelligence.